Hello and welcome to the Project Doctor podcast. My name is Ralph Goossens and I'm your project management expert, presenting you with all the things you need to know about project management. Project Doctor is here to provide you with expert analysis and with recipes that you can put to practical use immediately after the podcast, so stay tuned. I'm very glad to hear that so many of you have already shown up. So let's get started right away. You are now listening to the third episode of this series. And we're going to do in this episode exactly what we're going to do in all of our podcasts, which is share project management expertise with you and provide you some recipes, stuff that you can put into practical use immediately. For this third episode, we're going to talk about project organization. And obviously, this is potentially a very broad subject, so we'll focus on two key areas, which is roles and responsibilities and team dynamics. Now, since all projects have to be organized and all projects have a team, this is something that should be of interest to all project managers alike. We'll be sharing some insights on how to think about project organization and look at some models to look at team dynamics as they're unfolding in your team. And we'll share some of these materials on our website, projectdoctor.online. So don't forget to go there after the podcast and download these extras. So let's start thinking about how we define roles in a project. In the first place, these are linked to responsibilities and skills. Some of your roles will be required because of the subject matter or the industry that your project in. For instance, in software development, which happens to be my area, you will have architects, designers, developers, and testers. But on the other hand, if your project would be on youth unemployment, to name just an example, you will have social workers, civil servants, job coaches, etc. So the subject matter is one area that defines the type of roles that you need in your project. A second factor determining the roles is that they are required because of the methodology or the process that you are following. For instance, if you're in an agile approach, you will have the roles of Scrum Master, of Product Owner, etc. So bringing that all together on a bit more abstract level, there is a tool called the Raki matrix, which basically defines the roles as who is responsible, saying who has to do something, who is accountable, saying who must answer for what happens, who is consulted, who's giving advice to stuff that's happening, and who needs to be informed, basically receiving information on status and progress in your project. So Raki is this abbreviation for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And if you put that into a matrix and have the roles on one axis and the names of the various people in your team on the other axis, that will give you a very good tool in deciding exactly how responsibilities are being divided across the team. Closely linked to the roles is the process that you're following. We've already touched upon that when we mentioned Agile, but there's also in software development at least Waterfall, DSDM, and what have you. So to complicate matters, the process flow can again be linked to or influenced by the tools that you use to manage your project. For example, a tool like Jira, which is focused on issue handling, it has a default set of statuses for any issue, and these statuses basically determine the workflow to a very large degree. You can adapt the default set, of course, but that requires that you really design your work processes yourself upfront, which can be a bit of a challenge. As a bit of experience, to be honest, there have been projects where I've lost some time fiddling around with Jira setup, trying to find out the optimum. And I guess that for many tools, the default works pretty well because they've probably been designed and built by people who have already been there. So I would recommend to start with the default setup. Ask your team to use that during a specific pilot phase, not make any changes during the pilot phase, and afterwards do an evaluation and then make an update to the default status flow and other settings only once or else you'll risk to spend much more time on tweaking than you'll ever gain back from it. Another question related to that is, could you let the team define its own roles? In the Netherlands, there was this management book called Managing Professionals, Do Not Do It. So there's also, of course, the hype of self-steering teams, where we've had a lot of publications around that. And the question is, therefore, can you let the team define its own roles? Now, professionals always do like a high degree of autonomy, and it comes with the type of work that they're doing. After all, they are professionals, so they are applying high-grade skills, and they've spent a lot of time learning the tricks of the trade, so you better not tell them how to do the work. But that's on the individual level, and a project organization is about orchestration of a team, many individuals. And actually, the orchestra metaphor, I think, is quite a good one. In the orchestra, the conductor will not tell the violinist how to play, but she will tell him when to play and how fast, etc., and how it must sound in the overall piece that the whole orchestra is producing. So it's quite similar in projects. You don't tell the individual specialists how they must do their stuff, but you do need to tell them when to have stuff ready, how it must fit in with the rest of the deliverables, and to what quality criteria it will be tested and how it will be tested. So you're setting the conditions that must be satisfied, and then it's up to the professionals to figure out how best to meet those conditions. And basically, setting up those conditions is just another word for defining your project organizations. So the roles will be always in two different categories. There are the professionals who focus on creating the raw materials, the output of your project, and the professionals who are focused on guarding the conditions that you set up. And you, as a project manager, are the end responsible for all of that. So in this Raki matrix that we discussed in the beginning of the podcast, the R for responsible for the whole project organization will be next to your name. The second aspect that we're going to talk about is the team in your project organization. Now, in recruiting for your team, you'll check that people can take on the various roles that you have in mind for them or that you have defined. But what you will get for free, of course, is their behavior, their peculiar dislikes and likes, their biases, their prides and prejudices. And there are various models that can help you to try and understand the group dynamics that will unfold as you get the project rolling. All of these models, I must say, are of course abstractions. They show idealized types, and the variety of actual human behavior is much, much wider than can be captured in any model. Still, they can be useful, and knowing about these can help you get a handle of what the heck is going on in your team. The first one I'd like to mention is Leery's rows, which is a model that characterizes behavior along four sides that are opposing. We have closeness opposite distance, and we have leading opposite following. So this gives a kind of compass rows, hence the name, or you could call it a pie with 8 pieces, and the behaviors are categorized into one of these 8 pieces of the pie. And what Leery says is that a specific kind of behavior in one piece of the pie tends to evoke in other members in the team the piece of the pie that's directly opposite the behavior that someone is showing. And this is how group dynamics starts. You'll find a picture of Leery's rows in the materials that I'm sharing on the Project Doctor online site. A second model that I'd like to mention is the model of Tuckman team development, where he describes 5 phases in how a group organizes itself as the project continues. And there's 5 steps. He describes the first one is forming, where people get to know each other. Then storming, where the various differences in character are kind of colliding. Then norming, where people get used to each other and kind of settle down in division of labor. Then performing, where the maximum output can be generated in the project. and adjourning, which is where the team dissolves after the project has ended. Again, this Tuckman team development model is, I have a picture of that, you'll find it on projectdoctor.online. The third and the last one I'd like to mention is the Belbin team roles. And again, here it is a typification of behavior in 8 main types, where he has created a matrix where he sets the individual contrasting with the collective. And on the other axis, he has 4 main approaches where he says people can be predominantly thinking or wanting or doing or feeling. And that leads again to 8 main types of behavior. As I've said, these are all very gross simplifications, and the actual behavior that you'll see from people is much, much more interesting and much more varied. But again, having these models in the back of your mind can help you get a handle of what's going on and understanding it at a more simplified level. What's important for you as a project manager is that these models can also help you to look in the mirror and recognize exactly how your own behavior is, what tendency you have, and where in each of these pies or models you are predominantly. And to give you one story from my own experience, in one of the projects I was working with a sponsor whom I thought was very direct and very confronting, to the point of actually being rude to me. And I was a bit worried about that because I was his project manager running the stuff for him. So I was really, really worried why he was being so rude and so direct to me, fearing that he would kick me out at some point. So that made me feel quite uneasy, and I had to kind of get my nerve together to discuss with him at one day over lunch, confronting him and asking him exactly why he was doing that to me. So what he explained is that his way of predominant behavior is to think very fast, to think almost binary, and have yes or no decisions at the snap of a finger. Whereas my primary concern is usually to be more nuanced, more detailed, give all the background, and then in the end come up with a conclusion, if at all. So he was really, as he explained, pushing me towards being much more direct with him and just saying to him, do this or do that without too much fuss or hassle. So after that, we understood from each other where we came from, and from that point on, of course, my relationship with him was much improved, and I could change my behavior also in his presence to be, let's say, less nuanced and come to the point much, much quicker. So to wrap it up in this episode, there's one more thing I want to mention to you, which is a quite interesting book by a guy called Patrick Lencioni called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And here he describes the main 5 things that, according to his view, can go wrong, and also give you some pointers on how to repair that. Very much recommended. You'll find the title again on the projectdoctor.online website. So to wrap it up, what have we seen in this episode? We've seen project organization as based upon roles with the Raki matrix. We've seen team behavior models that help you to get a more simplified look on group dynamics and how they evolve. And finally, we've seen that you as a project manager are responsible for all of that and should be able to adapt your own behavior to work with the team dynamics and get the people to behave in a way that is productive and gets to the performing stage of Tuckman's team development model. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. Please visit projectdoctor.online to download the extra materials, and speak to you next time. Bye-bye.